Welcome to a new episode of Reach. Today's episode, we're going to be furthering our discussion on relationships in regards to dating. This comes from Autism Society, but there's still a general misconception going around that those on the spectrum aren't really interested in friendships, relationships, and there's been research that contraindicates that we're on the spectrum. We actually are interested in hanging with people and actually going further into dating and marriage.
Yeah, it's very true. A statistic that I actually know about is that it's like 90% of autistic females will never get married. And as an autistic female, that's actually really quite heartbreaking because there are autistic females out there that do want to get married someday. There are autistic females who genuinely want that love and friendship and something more than just, friendship and partnership, essentially.
Yeah, that coincides with one study that I found that from 2017 that indicated only about 5% have ever been married of people who are on the spectrum.
Wow. Wow. It's so interesting because throughout my life I have dated people, and it's interesting too because relationships in my world have never really been like necessarily the most stable. For example, the longest relationship of mine was 7 months of being together and then 3.5 months of an engagement. And that's the longest that I've ever had. And it's kind of interesting because when it comes to relationships, there's a specific dynamic and some social rules that you ultimately have to follow within relationships, but some of those are really hard to understand. There's complex social cues, there's nonverbal cues that we have to pick up on, and that's really hard sometimes as a female with autism. That's definitely something that I have noticed going into relationships.
It's not just limited to females on the spectrum, because
I Yes.
my longest relationship was 6 months, and that's about it. It didn't end very well, and yes, navigating the social aspect of it to figure out, okay, it's a lot of communication on both sides, whether you're with someone who is not on the spectrum or if you're with someone that is on the spectrum. Communication is, no matter what, going to be very, very important. And it's also being tolerant of one, a lot of new, a lot of potential change, and a lot of compromise, which for a lot of this might be like, oh my God, you said the word compromise. Like, I like my things. I like specific foods. I like going to a restaurant and ordering only one thing. And now I have to try restaurants because I want to be with somebody. Um,
Right?
I don't know if I can do that.
Honestly, I feel that, but it's so interesting too. You said communication, and for me, what I have experienced in my dating life has been, if I overly communicate, then that's a huge, huge red flag because, if I'm reaching out and I'm like, "Hey, how's it going?" at least a couple times a day, that might be okay to some people, but there are some people who are like, they will automatically do something called ghost you, which is, they leave the message on read or they read the message basically and then they just don't respond.
Or
So
you end up being blocked.
yes, exactly. You're not able to communicate them in any capacity. And so communication is so important, but then there are some people who are like, I don't like constant text messages. I don't like, more than a few text messages a day. There are some people who are like that. And, unfortunately, a lot of those rules are unspoken. And so sometimes what I've noticed in my world of dating is I almost feel like everybody comes with their own rule book, and you almost have to figure out, okay, what are their rules and what are their compromises and what are they willing to, compromise with, while also at the same time trying to figure out our own rules. What will make me feel secure? What will make me feel like my partner actually wants to be with me?
Yes, and making sure you still advocate for yourself and take care of yourself in a relationship is paramount, because
Absolutely.
we do have the tendency of people pleasing and going out of our way to bend towards somebody else instead of respecting our own boundaries, which when first going into the dating world is like, what are they?
Right? I can
And
understand that.
that's a hard curve to learn, and it takes time, and pacing is also another thing that's paramount on top of communication. And in regard to the text messaging, yes, I have noticed a vast difference between the texting frequency, the immediate um, responses with people who are also on the spectrum compared to people who are not. It is so interesting to see, like, oh, I'm texting, and then the person's immediately responding is like, yes, we're having an information exchange.
It's funny because it's true. It's one of those things too where it's like knowing myself. I am somebody who feels good when it comes to communication. If I get a message from you, if I get some sort of response from you. And granted, I'm not necessarily looking for you have to respond to me within 5 seconds in order for me to feel good. But I want to know that like you still kind of like me, you still want to be with me, hang out with me, have a relationship with me. For me, like I almost need it in black and white just because I need to know that I need to have that security. For me, sometimes those long spans of time without communication really poses a red flag for me because it means, okay, this person doesn't like me anymore. What do I do? Did I do something wrong? Did I say something wrong? I go through these questions in my head and it's almost like imposter syndrome where it's like, I definitely did something wrong. I am not a good enough girlfriend. I need to change. And that's where that people pleasing cycle comes in.
Yep, and that falls into that basis of all those social flubs we had growing up. And it's like, okay, I definitely did something wrong, so I'm getting ignored just like everybody else I've interacted with. Let's just move on.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. And it's really interesting too because not just with text messages, but phone calls can also be a whole other conversation in of itself when it comes to relationships. I'm not a fan of phone calls. Not very often. I have to like you a lot in order to be on the phone with you for longer than 5 minutes. Or you have to be someone from work, or you have to be a really good friend. There's certain things about me when it comes to phone calls. I just don't like too much of the phone call conversation or FaceTime conversation because, again, for me, it's just like, I have to almost expose myself in a different way, where in text messages, I can delay my response. I can wait a little bit, you know?
I've grown opposite that, actually.
Really?
Really, yes. I if one, I don't like texting without an actual keyboard. It drives me nuts. Touchscreens are never my friend. So if I have to text more than like 3 times with someone, one, I'm like, okay, it means we're having a conversation. Let's switch to phone, because I'm like, let's just have a conversation instead of just tapping on my screen.
Fair.
So
I
that's
I've
my
had
approach to that.
yeah, I've had boyfriends like that are just like, "I wanna talk on the phone," and I'm like, why? Why do I have to do this? Like I've had a long day where all I want to do is just like relax and look at my phone. I don't mind talking to you, but maybe I want to text you instead of call you. But for me, again, like I have to really, really enjoy your presence and enjoy your company in order for me to talk on the phone with a boyfriend or a partner longer than like 5-10 minutes. I have to really enjoy your company. And that may sound very shallow, but to be honest with you, that's just something that I've noticed a lot about myself because I really don't like being on the phone and being super conversational. Just because for me, I notice with phone calls, you have to have like an immediate response, an immediate reaction. You have to almost like come up with what you need to say in the moment, where in a text message, I can sit on it if I need to. I can give myself a little bit of a delay.
That's fair, and it's increasingly stressed in different scenarios too, needing that delay. Um, Good example would be one if you haven't actually disclosed that you're on the spectrum, which is another topic we'll get to in a second. Uh, the other aspect is in the event you ever have like a little scuffle or argument with the person you're dating, and then you need that time to recollect and then talk again because you need that. You might have certain aspects of processing delays that you have no response, and to someone else it might seem that you're cold, but in reality you just haven't processed it yet.
Yeah, that's why for me, you mentioned conflicts, and for me, like, that's also why, sometimes text messaging or sometimes, writing can be really good, but also it can be really, really bad because sometimes, written messages can convey different feelings and different emotions. Again,
Yeah, connotation doesn't come through very well in text.
yes, unfortunately, and so it's like I might sit here and read a message and it might just have like a couple words. And then the first thing that's on my mind is you're mad at me. You might be really mad at me. I'm thinking of like those videos where they talk about how, different words and different phrases may have different meanings and stuff. And that's something that I've noticed too. And yeah, I mean, for me, it's conflicts are really, really tough when it comes to relationships because, some people are able to, you know, um, resolve conflict in different ways. I remember an ex-boyfriend of mine, whenever we got into an argument, he kept insisting on coming in and talking to me and trying to be in my space. And I'm somebody who needs space. If something happens to me, if I have like, for example, if I have a panic attack, I need to be away from everybody except my dogs. And because my dogs are a source of comfort for me, they get on top of me, they give me lots of kisses, they make sure to give me pressure. And that's something that, like if I'm in an argument with my partner, I don't want anything to do with them. I need to make sure that I'm thinking about things. I'm trying to make sure that the argument and how I'm processing everything that happened. I want to make sure that I'm separate from them so that way I'm not going back and forth with them and say something that I really don't mean to say.
Yeah, for me, like conflicts throw me into a very logic state, and that's not necessarily a good thing.
I'm curious to know more.
Like it makes me like very analytical, and like it shuts off my emotions. So like you want me to connect to you right now, it's not gonna happen.
Like processing time, processing time. Please give me the time.
Yeah, or if I'm overstimmed, forget it, just stay away from me.
Right, right. Yeah, I know personally when I've been in conflicts, with the whole ex-boyfriend thing coming into the room, he would be like, "We need to talk about this." And granted, this ex-boyfriend that I'm talking about is autistic too. And so he would come in and he would say, "I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you. We need to resolve this." My mom, and he even said this one time, my mom told me that I need to be in the same room with my partner when we're arguing and when there's a conflict because we need to be together to make up too. And it's like, no, I don't want you near me. I don't want you around me. I need to make sure that I am processing and, trying to handle our conflict and, come back in a better state of mind than when it was at the very beginning. So it's things like that where it's like the social rules aren't always the most clear. And when you have two people that are polar opposite when it comes to that kind of communication, you've got an exploding volcano basically of emotions. You know, they want to be right next to you, but I want to be away from you. So what's the compromise? And there
Exactly.
was
And
none.
yeah, it's that or learning to respect the other person for what they need and who they are,
Mhm.
which
Exactly.
again, part of that learning curve. So on the other side of this, let's look at some positive things like going into dating and some advice regarding that. So one key thing to recommend is going on like first or even second dates, don't go outright and disclose that you're on the spectrum. It's partly for more safety reasons than it is necessarily to like scare somebody and being afraid of that.
Yeah, I could see that. I think when I have gone out with a person, I've disclosed on like the first date, maybe on a couple of occasions. And I remember when I did disclose, almost immediately I was ghosted. I was almost immediately blocked. And though they didn't outright say anything to me, I could just tell that that statement was like a red flag for them. And it shouldn't be a red flag, but to them it's like, "Oh, you're autistic. Okay, I don't know what to do, and I don't know how to handle this." And so because of that, that was like for them, just not something that they want to deal with, for lack of a better term. um, so I agree about not disclosing on the first, second date, for at least for me, just because of that experience. But yeah.
It's one of those one would classify personal, and also it's a protected status technically. And like get to know the person a little bit more before you share that level of person or yeah, personal detail.
Yeah, and something that I get curious about from your end, I'm curious to know, when you've gone into a first date, what is considered first date conversational topics to you?
Uh, so some advice to that, the peers program uh, offers different suggestions on one, how to handle even asking someone on a date, two, as far as like what things to talk about, what not to talk about, patterns that you should possibly follow, slash rules of thumb, like after the date, don't go immediately say, okay, I love the date and let's meet again, giving it time to sit, let things settle, let people process what happened, then getting back to it. And even a wonderful thing it suggests also is how to handle the idea of either splitting the bill or paying for the bill or letting somebody else pay for the bill and not feeling bad about it.
Oh yeah.
Like
Um,
that social dynamic. So Peers covers a lot of those things. So I highly recommend Peers regarding that. Um, yeah, you have the general societal things of you don't usually want to bring up in any conversation, you know, politics, religion, and what have you. Um, so gear things towards like things you like to do, common, trying to find those common interests like you would for a friend, because a good relationship, like at least in my opinion, starts with friendship. So building based on that scaffolding would be my tip for that.
yeah, I can definitely understand that. It's kind of interesting too, because I view first dates as a combination of an interview and building a friendship. Because in an interview, you're expected to answer these like questions about yourself. You're not going to go too personal. You're not going to necessarily like, talk about your life story and where you came from and all the other things. But you might talk about certain common interests that you may have. You may talk about, you might talk about like your brothers or your sisters, things like that, but you may not go too much.
Yeah,
Um,
and not too specific either, because you don't want to go,
right.
okay, I am so and so. I live at 33 Main Street or whatever the street happens to be, and this is my apartment. And no, please don't do that on a first date. That screams a lot of potential danger, especially if you are disclosing that much information right away.
Yeah, it screams danger, but then also it sort of goes into, again, stigma. When you're going into dating, when you give too much information, a safety perspective is like, okay, you're putting yourself out there too much, but then at the same time, it's also a red flag, because now you're pretty much just unloading your life to this other person whom which you probably had just met very, very recently, maybe within the last, 24, 48 hours, depending on how you met the person, depending on,
Exactly.
depending on everything. But that being said, you have to be really, really careful with just how much information that you can give, from both of those perspectives.
I agree. Like, and like the danger aspect of like, would you go to a stranger and tell them where you live? Because
Right.
that's exactly what you would do if you gave that much information. So, and it's the same with building friendships. You want to, if you're going to give information, little bits at a time. One, to give the person time to breathe and process, and two, give them a chance if they want to change the topic. And
Yeah.
learning to go with the fact that people do change topics. Not
Yeah.
everybody goes on monotropic tangents as much as we love it. Not everybody does.
Yeah, unfortunately, not everyone wants to talk about pugs for 3 hours in my world, but hey, but that being said, it is one of those things where, yeah, you do have to be really careful with just how much you're talking about, and also, we've talked about this before, Conrad, info dumping. We don't want to info dump on one specific topic either, because going back to compromising, you have to be able to share the conversation, and, you can't overdo it. You also don't want the other person to overdo it on you. So it's kind of finding that like fine balance of, how much can you take in a conversation versus how much they can take in a conversation, and sort of just building a relationship based on that too.
Yeah. Now, a side thing. Uh, any tips on locations?
Oh, location. So I think honestly, coffee shops are usually a really good place to get to know somebody. I know that sounds very cliche, but hear me out. Coffee shops are a really good place just because you're in public. Okay, so there's people around just in case anything were to happen. Coffee shops aren't typically too loud. So if you want to have a conversation, you have the opportunity to have that type of conversation. You can meet with them, have, a sip of coffee, maybe have like a pastry and just talk about the things that you want to talk about. Um, I like coffee shops for that reason. I also kind of like the very cliche dinner date or lunch date or whatever. I am a breakfast person myself, but that being said, that being said, I think like food can also be a contributor in a first date in the sense of, maybe we're not like fully talking about our entire lives, but maybe we can see like based on the food that we're choosing or the drinks that we're choosing, we might be able to build up some sort of common ground with that. Oh, you like pancakes? Me too. I really like pancakes too. But today I decided to order French toast. Something that might like bring that common ground together. What do you think?
Yep. Um, I'm one for the whole like meeting at a coffee shop and like definitely like the dinner or lunch date. Because of how picky I am with food and the fact that I don't drink anything caffeinated, like it's be an interesting conversation like meeting someone at the coffee shop and going, yeah, I don't drink anything in this menu and I'm happy to talk to you, but yeah, this is not actually something I usually do. I
Oh my goodness.
but I will be blunt and honest about it. It's just like I'm here to meet you, so like at least enjoy the atmosphere because coffee shops have wonderful atmospheres. Don't get me wrong, I
Yes.
love them. Some of them are have really nice artwork they have on the
Ah,
walls. So I've seen like classic coffee shops, um, like independently owned coffee shops. So like it's really interesting to see stuff like that. It's a nice little like variety in environments. And the other aspect of this is like if I were to say scope out a place, if I wanted to recommend a place to go eat, I would one want to scope out the environment and even possibly try the food first before like okay that we're going to eat here. That way, one, I know the menu, know exactly what I want to order. That way, I don't have to think about it because I whenever I pick a restaurant, it takes me a while to pick something, and then that's usually it. That's the one thing I will have.
yes. Yeah,
I
I
go
do.
into restaurants and they're like, usual, yes. it saves so much conversation.
I could see that. I could see that. I've definitely learned to be a little bit more flexible in terms of like where I want to go for eating and stuff, just because I think this just comes from hanging out with people who have different tastes and different perspectives on food. And so I've sort of learned to adapt to that, but then find like the two or three items that might feel safe to me. So I've learned to do that. I know personally, um, like I have been on dates where it started at like a bar, which by the way, I just want to say I do not recommend
I don't
going
recommend
to
that
a
either.
bar. Yeah. Don't recommend that. I understand that, it might be a fun environment, the atmosphere might be great, but thinking about drinking alcohol, if that's what you're planning on doing on this date, alcohol can lead to impairment, thought
Impaired judgment.
impairment, impaired judgment, exactly. And so with that already at play, that can turn into a safety risk in of itself. And so when I think about going on a first date, I also think about, if we're going to have drinks, I would prefer not to drink alcohol on the first date just because that can lead to an abundance of safety issues down the road. And that's something that I'm not willing to risk at all.
Yeah. And when scoping out these environments, I also suggest scoping out the like if you're sensitive to noise, different textures. Maybe they have a fan that's really squeaky and you can't stand it. Like, you never know. So just being able to experience that environment ahead of time, it also allows you to get accustomed to all the noises that are usually there. That way, you can spend more time being in the moment in the conversation with the person you're with rather than going, okay, what was that noise? What was that noise? And looking like a dog trying to find squirrels. And
Been there.
or
I,
that meerkat, oh, danger.
I completely agree with that, and it's so funny because, like we're talking about all of these things and you would think like, everybody should do these things. And, unfortunately it doesn't happen enough, but also we want to make sure that we feel comfortable too, and I'm not saying that, you have to necessarily agree to what I want to do because this is how I feel about this specific environment, but I need to know what I'm going into. Changes in routine in general are just very, very hard to handle at times. And I know personally, going into a new restaurant, I might have a little bit of a hard time with just different types of food. How would they prepare this type of, for example, a burger? How are they going to prepare these types of French fries? How do they prepare a specific type of drink? Again, just thinking about all of those different things are things that we think about because we want to make sure we feel comfortable too.
Yeah, I've gone to a place with my grandmother once by the beach, and they're like, yeah, they serve nice burgers. I'm like, I bite into the burger. I'm like, why are there onion bits in it?
Yeah. A nice burger to you is not the same thing as a nice burger to me. Like,
Like that's a factor.
yeah, and it is interesting because, those little things really do matter to us. And so if we notice those little things, we might be out of the moment and we might think, our partner might think like, why does this matter to you? Well, it's because we pick up on things a lot more. And it's not to say that they are not picking up on it, but we notice little things. Something as simple as the taste of a meat, that matters. That actually really, really matters. Like, even if it's just like a little bit off, and you're trying to like explain, hey, this does not taste good because it might have like a stronger like taste or a taste that we're not used to. But then they might say, oh, well, it tastes fine to me. That's great, but my feelings are still important too, and how my experiences is valid as well. It's those things as well, and that can definitely get in the way of dating, I feel.
Yeah, and then the other aspect of the environment would be making sure you are prepared for an environment too. Like if you need earplugs or like headphones, and just that way you don't get overstimulated, which may lead into the conversation of like why you need it, but that's something for you to disclose at your own leisure and timing. Don't let somebody else pull that out of you if you don't want to share it.
I think my advice with that too is if you know that you don't like certain types of environments and you might find that those environments are not something you're ready for, don't push yourself to be ready for that environment. If you know that you don't like a place that has too much noise because it's really hard to concentrate on your partner and concentrate on the conversation, then go to a place that you know, or talk about going to a place that you know is a little bit on the quieter side. I
Yeah,
think that communication can be really important, trying to explain to them, hey, I prefer to go to places that may not have as much noise. I know this place does not have that overly loud environment.
yeah, and even specifying like I don't like to go to loud environments, and just keeping their setting your boundary at that.
Yeah, exactly. Boundaries are extremely important. And, you know, going back to not pushing yourself, you don't wanna necessarily, like, go outside of your boundaries if you don't feel comfortable. Would you like it if somebody did that to you? Chances are, no, you wouldn't, and so you can't expect us to necessarily do the same. It's give and take. Of course, compromises do matter, but if there's a hard boundary, if there's a hard line, then people need to respect that.
Absolutely. And that's another aspect of this. Like, okay, someone might text you last minute. Oh, you want to go hang out or go do something? Uh, no. I'm the type of person that like, oh, I have free time. I'm going to schedule everything I can during that free time.
Yeah, I'm not very good at spontaneous hangouts or spontaneous dates or anything like that. I've done and I will be honest about this. I've put myself in situations where, I've been asked, "Hey, can I come over?" And I've allowed it before, but I've since learned that those types of boundaries are things that I have to put a hold on for my safety, for my health, just for myself in general, because I don't want to necessarily extend or break my boundaries for somebody and they keep disrespecting those boundaries, that goes into a whole conversation. That goes into a whole thing about safety. And so for me, boundaries have to be hard and set. And, if you like, for example, the spontaneous hangouts, I've learned that no, I don't like them. You know, plan them out with me for the next week or, talk to me about it, at a time where I know that I can be free for you and be in the moment for you. 'Cause those last minute changes can be a lot on somebody.
Exactly. I totally agree. Those last minute things just, ugh, because I'm like, yeah, I would love to, but I already planned to do this, 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 and this, and like, and then all that stress of, okay, how do I juggle all this? How do I like, and then I want you try to enjoy your company, and yes, it would be lovely to enjoy your company, but again, this is a learning to set those boundaries and not be that overly bendy people pleaser that we can be.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. As a certified, I call myself a certified people pleaser, because I swear with everything that I have, I will bend over backwards just to make sure that somebody feels good, feels safe, feels like I'm supporting them. Really more so on like a work level, but when it comes to the people that I love, I do the same thing. And it's like I want to juggle all of these different things, and I know that this person is finally available to hang out right now, but I really can't hang out. I as much as I want to cancel all my plans and just go with them, I just can't do that. And so that's where again it goes back to respecting boundaries, and it goes back to respecting, respecting the time that you have too. I can't just drop all my plans to hang out with you and make sure that, we get our time. And I get it. I know that it might feel, frustrating to not be able to hang out with them all the time or not be able to hang out when they're available to hang out. But that being said, they need to also respect your time, your space, yourself overall.
Yes, it's a
So,
mutual respect.
absolutely. Absolutely. That's what relationships are supposed to be. It's mutual respect, mutual agreements, mutual compromises, all of that. And so, there's you have to almost understand what that's going to be like. And if you don't understand, having that open communication, that open line of communication of, hey, maybe this is where, I'm feeling a little bit disrespected, or this is where I'm feeling a little bit hurt. And I want to make sure that we clarify this so that way we can get back to where we were before.
Exactly. And watching out for other things too that might happen in those relationships. Like it's one thing for the spontaneous thing, which that's mild and people can be like that. It's okay. That's who they are.
Yeah.
But then there's other red flags to be more uh, correction things that are red flags when going on dates and being trying relationships out that one should be aware of too, like someone who's too controlling or trying to guilt you into doing so many different things, and it might be hard for you to see those things because some of those things are kind of those unspoken connotation type of phrasings that like and you get sucked into it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, we can talk all day about those types of things, and at the end of the day, what matters is that open line of communication, just being able to express freely and openly about what your boundaries are and how you might feel. I know that that can be really hard for some of us autistic people, but when we're given the safe space to do so, then I feel like we can thrive that much more in relationships.
Yeah, I agree. It is like being able to be ourselves in any place, especially a relationship, is, I'd argue, paramount and key to that relationship being able to thrive too. Because we spend so much of our time is trying not to say stand out or not being ourselves. It's exhausting. And
It
to
is
have to do that in a relationship, nobody should have to mask themselves 24/7. That is not
correct.
healthy.
No, it's not. It's not. And even that, masking in relationships is definitely something that happens. And, you know, again, it's all about just really making sure that we have this this open understanding and open communication, open agreement that we're going to be able to talk about these things and work through these things together. That's how we will thrive, is when we have that. If we don't have that, then we're not safe in our relationships.
And speaking of safety, when we were talking about locations, a couple key things to recommend that Piers does cover: go to public locations, do not go somewhere necessarily one-on-one private, not person's car, do not go to their place, and vice versa. It's a lot safer to meet in public.
Yeah. When you're in a public space, there are people around you. There are people who can pick up on signs if you need any specific help, or if there is anything that you're struggling with in the moment. There are people around you. And that's why public spaces are definitely the way to go. And if somebody ever tries to pressure you to go to their house, or, hang out in their car, anything like that on the first date, and you're not comfortable with that, no, that communication has to stop, because that's a hard boundary. And if that's not something you're willing, and again, I'm not saying like you should be willing to do this, but you shouldn't be willing to do it if you are not comfortable with it. And so that's where, again, those public places are such a highly recommended area to go for your first date, because you know that there's a safety net that's there.
Exactly. And also communicate to someone where you are.
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think I share my location with a couple people just because for me, it's a safety thing. I want to make sure that they know that I'm okay. I want them to know that I am in a safe place. I'm in a safe space. So, yeah, I could not agree more about, sharing locations with somebody that will make sure that you are okay too.
Exactly. So
Well, that's been our episode on relationships. Tune in next month for our episode on college admissions. Thanks so much.
exciting.
Very exciting.